this company just IPO'd. So you've got Horizon Aircraft, ticker on the NASDAQ, by the way, is HOVR. And we've got the CEO, Brandon Robinson, hanging out with us. All access starts right now. How's it going, Brandon?
Zineid, great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm sure you're feeling even better. I got to ask, all market stuff aside, which we'll talk about, how's it feel to be publicly traded now?
Oh, it feels great. I mean, it's a culmination of so much work from so many folks. It feels fantastic. You know, the NASDAQ process to get listed is robust for a company, and we're happy to be through it and really happy to be trading now.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I know I got so many questions to ask you, but you guys have this really cool B-roll that I want to go ahead and throw up. So let's go ahead and add that B-roll here. I want to watch it because I went ahead and took a look at it and I just absolutely loved it. So we'll check this out and we'll get into the questions here in a minute.
We're here today at the ACE Climatic Wind Tunnel to test the aerodynamic stability of our 50% prototype at transition speeds of about 80 kilometers per hour.
Top speed coming up to 23, followed by a full ramp up to 45. Okay, so we're 55. Yeah, covers are moving.
Okay, we're going to bring up the high power on it, so 6.
All right, loading sequence 6.
Powering up.
Wind tunnel coming up to 78. Covers closing.
I mean, that I just had to show the viewers that to start things off. That looked really cool to the point where, like, I don't have a pilot's license, but if you could let me come hang out a little bit, that could be a lot of fun.
Well, we could definitely work something out. I was an instructor in the Air Force flying F-18. So if you want to, if you want someone to teach you how to fly, just give me a call.
Yeah, I got you. We'll cook something up. But look, obviously the folks saw the B-roll, but just explain it to us a little bit. Explain to me like I'm 5. What is it that your company does?
Okay, so we're building a hybrid electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So a lot of words stuck together, but essentially an aircraft that can take off and land vertically, just like a helicopter. So think any sort of helipad or parking lot. It can land or take off from. Doesn't need a runway.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, it transforms back into kind of a normal aircraft configuration, and it can go about twice as fast as a helicopter. So think helicopter that is twice as fast and that can still get in and out of really tight spots. And hybrid electric, so it can recharge itself en route, recharge itself when it lands. And it's, like I said, it's a pretty impressive machine.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to, when I think of advantages of a helicopter, it's like you say, you get into tight spaces, especially in like terms of rescue missions and different things like that. It's easy to just come and get in, get out. I want to go back to the IPO, especially the inspiration to go ahead and go public as well. And if you could provide a little bit of an overview of the company's journey in that aspect as well.
Sure. So we were pretty successful in raising capital in the private markets. And the decision to go public was a couple of things. One, we found a great partner with the Pono Capital 3 folks. And shared a great vision with us. They had ties to some decent investment as well. And fundamentally, we also wanted to share this journey with retail investors as well. So back up 2 years, ahead of the sort of de-SPAC boom, a lot of very inflated valuations. We're coming in with a very reasonable valuation and think there's a lot of room to grow for folks. So we're primarily for those 2 reasons, and alongside, of course, raising next level capital to help support our full scale prototype development, which we're really excited is underway right now. Those are the primary drivers.
And of course, speaking of money, you had an announcement of $250 million deal with Jet Set Go, which is significant as well. Can you go ahead and guide us through the details? And mainly, I'm curious how this collaboration will drive the company's growth and kind of really take it to the next level.
Yeah, and so a lot of companies in our space, in our advanced air mobility, kind of air taxi space, if you will, have raised some significant LOIs in terms of pre-sales of their aircraft. That's quite common. We had been approached on several occasions to do the same, but we're trying to be open, transparent with everyone, and we wanted to have a real product with real, or at least a vision towards the final product that was a little more developed before we started getting into that.
Yeah.
We met Jet Set Go about 6 months ago, and it was a pretty rigorous process of us sharing information, sharing performance metrics, sharing some of our test data.
Yeah.
And Jet Set Go is interesting because they're really an operational company. And I think that's what sets our company apart a little bit. So I was a fighter pilot in the Air Force. My father's been flying and fixing airplanes for the best part of, half a century. And so we're not just a bunch of aerospace engineers sitting around, in a university or from a university. We've lived that sort of life. I've been that person in the cockpit in bad weather or unexpected things happen. And so, we're building a machine that is built for the real world, which is pretty exciting.
And I took a discovery flight, I believe is what it's called, when I was looking at getting my license as a pilot. And it was just the coolest thing. I can only imagine going as fast as you've gone and your planes go. That's a whole different experience in itself. But you mentioned a couple of different things. Let's talk about the current and the future use cases that you have, right? Because you've got a couple of different things coming up. I want to shed light on the markets, both the consumer and the commercial side, that Horizon Aircraft is looking to disrupt.
Yeah, so it kind of happens in phases. Initially, if you can build a helicopter that travels twice as fast, imagine getting someone that's injured on the side of the road to the hospital in literally half the time. Maybe you're transporting critical cancer drugs that are the time sensitive from one hospital to another, or any sort of critical goods. Maybe it's COVID relief supplies to some isolated community. All over the U.S. and all over Canada and the world, there's little communities that have to travel hours and hours and hours to go pick up any sort of supplies, and it's really stressful for them. So imagine dropping stuff off right to those communities. Not to mention, here in New York, it took me 45 minutes to get down to Wall Street. I could have walked here faster, right? Just gridlock traffic everywhere. I flew a lot of missions out of Southern California. Same thing. You got 12 lanes, absolute gridlock traffic, and you look 500 feet up, and it's clear blue sky. So using that third dimension and a much more efficient way to move people and goods around difficult places and congested places around the world, in North America, of course.
You mentioned competitors, and I know we had a question regarding that, so I'll come back directly to that. But what distinguishes the Cavalryte X7 from its counterparts?
So the first thing is that it's hybrid electric, and so we don't have to fly from charging station to charging station. Once we complete a takeoff, we recharge our batteries. Once we complete a landing, we can recharge ourselves in almost no time while the aircraft is being refueled. Hybrid electric also gives us much more range. So a lot of the competitors are all electric. Think, kind of typical air taxi from one part of the city to another part, maybe 20 kilometers away. We go between cities. So at that regional level, out to 200 and 300, 400 miles with full fuel reserves. We also have a lot more power on board, and so we can move the aircraft a lot faster than a lot of the competitors. So think, instead of thousands of pounds of batteries and a couple of 100 pounds of stuff for people, we have a couple of 100 pounds of batteries and 1,000 pounds of stuff to move. And so we like that equation. And I think it's resonating with a lot of the operators that are looking to get in early, like Jet Set Go, with the order for $250 million, up to $500 million of our aircraft. We're pretty excited about that competitive advantage. So, designed for longer range, tougher, bad weather, kind of the real world operations.
Yeah, bad weather is definitely something that I think a lot of people complain about when it came to Teslas. That's when it's very cold, you can't even get into the car. So I think those are things I'm sure you guys have thought about as well. Let's go ahead and talk about the market and where it can be, right? I believe right now it's projected for the market to be about 1.2 billion, or was, in 2023. And it's projected to be anywhere between 22 to 24 billion by 2030. What factors do you think are kind of contributing to this surge, and how are you set up for success to make sure you get a nice little piece of that pie?
Yeah, so it is pretty exciting. Again, if you can build a helicopter that is much cheaper and can move much quicker, there's all sorts of business cases. And again, with the world's congestion kind of building in major populations, it is, there's all sorts of different use cases that are driving those market projections. So again, that's pretty exciting. Now, I think another thing that's, of course, driving this kind of revolution in flight is the advancements in technology. So now you have much, denser, energy dense batteries. We have electric motors that are really robust, coming from the automotive sector. Now the aerospace sector, even better electric motors. So The technology, again, really exciting for the future kind of generations. I have 3 little kids, and now that I've got a peek into the real engineering and what's possible, it is very exciting for those folks and for the future.
I'm sure they're a little upset whenever you have to drive them to school and say you can't just fly them to school. I'm sure it's a little bummer for them.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've talked about the competitive advantage that you have with your type of flight. Are there any other competitive advantages that you have over your competitors? That's something that Lynn, one of our viewers, wanted to ask you.
So great question, Lynn. I would say one of the interesting factors about our aircraft is 98% of the time, it is just a normal aircraft. So it can land conventionally on a runway or take off conventionally if there's any problem with any of the vertical lift systems, or if you want to stress the aircraft out a little bit less, you can roll down the runway, take off normally, and then go and land on a helipad or a parking lot or some tight location. And so I think that's a pretty significant competitive advantage. Now, also think of the certification ramifications for that. So from a certification perspective, you talk to the regulatory folks, and now you have an airplane that just flies around like a normal airplane that they understand how to certify for 98% of the time.
Yeah.
It's, they collectively sort of breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. Again, because for fundamentally 98% of the time, it's just a normal airplane, which is kind of cool.
Now we're going to go to the chat to ask a couple of questions here. I'm going to go back to Lynn because she's got some experience. What about airspace congestion? As she's got 2 former United flight attendants here with Lynn and Randy watching at home.
So that's a great question. Again, I've flown in some of the most congested airspace, Southern California and around New York. Now, a lot of that congestion is actually in the upper levels, so above 10,000 feet. When you get below 10,000 feet, it's much more reasonable. And there's a lot of corridors that can be used right now to move some of these aircraft around. So I am, having flown in that airspace, I'm less worried about the congestion. Most of these aircraft will fly less than 10,000 feet. And of course, less than 250 knots or about 280 miles an hour. And so that airspace is much more conducive to moving these aircraft around and moving people and goods.
Now, one thing I do want to, I know there's certain things that you can answer and you can't answer, but I'm just going to see what the chat wants to know. And if you're able to answer them, that'd be great. One of them is here from Sonny talking about what is a price point that we're looking at? And are we going to ever have it for the retail investor, the retail customer as well?
So we're targeting 3.5 to 5 million. That's been publicly released. And of course, the Jet Set Go LOI, 50 aircraft at 5 million for a total of 250 million, I think. Kind of sets that upper boundary. Of course, when we get into higher volume production, that price point will come down. And we compare ourselves against similar helicopters. Again, being able to move twice as fast and much lower operating costs. Against a similar helicopter, we should come in much cheaper.
And then in terms, you mentioned twice as fast. I know Nick's got a couple of questions, and that'll be probably the last one I'll ask. You've got Nick wants to know the flight speed capability, and then of course he wants to know about range here as well.
Yeah, great question, Nick. So again, it's been published on the website. We're max speed of 250 knots. So think about 450 kilometers an hour for the metric folks out there. For range, we're targeting in the 300 to 500 nautical mile range, so up to about 800 kilometers with fuel reserves. Of course, it depends on how heavily the aircraft is loaded, and depends if if the person asking the question has a deep aerospace sort of background. We can talk a lot longer, but that's a more complicated answer. But again, moving at that 500 mile range at speeds up to 250 knots is pretty impressive.
And then last one, I think I said that 3 times, and I promise you this is the last one. I've got a question about what do you think most retail investors do not understand about the EVTOL industry?
Well, I think, say back up 2 years, and there was a question of, are these aircraft going to be certified? Will they actually work? Now the industry is much more, I would say, sophisticated, and there's been a lot more analysis. Now there's a lot more excitement that, hey, now the regulatory frameworks are being constructed, they're in place. And it's more of a question of when these aircraft are going to be certified. And if they hit those metrics, then they can do useful work in those business cases are starting to get sharpened and starting to play out. So that's something that might be something that the average retail investor might not appreciate, how far this industry has come in the next 2 years, and that exciting trajectory moving forward for the next 2 to 3 years. We'll have Volocopter flying in Paris this summer, hopefully. We'll have some really interesting use cases on the West Coast with Joby and Archer potentially in early 2025. Yeah. And so now it's, this industry is really taking off, to use a pun.
No pun intended there, I'm sure. You know, it's interesting. We had another program afterwards, and I was gonna be like, well, we go from Horizon Aircraft, we fly to another segment. But anyway, I'll save that cheesiness for later. But Brandon, those are all the questions that I personally had. And of course, as you can see, the chat was involved quite a bit as well. But I want to give the floor to you in case there were any topics that I didn't bring up that you wanted to talk to our viewers at home about, as they're clearly engaged with this topic.
Okay, Zunaid, well, thanks very much for the opportunity. We're just at Horizon Aircraft. We're just really happy to be that operationally focused kind of company that's building a really useful machine, and we're making solid progress. So stand by for some really exciting news coming up. And yeah, we're excited to build a better future for everybody.
All right, I'm gonna hit you up. I'm gonna hit up your rep and say, hey, listen, I need to fly out to wherever you are so I can check these things out in person. But this is awesome, and I really enjoyed watching that video and learning more about the cool things that y'all are doing, and really excited to talk to you here in the future as well.
Thanks, Zunaid. Call us anytime. You're welcome anytime.
I appreciate it, my man. And that is going to be Brandon Robinson, who is the CEO of Horizon Aircraft. Ticker on the NASDAQ is HOVR. Chat, thank you so much. It's always great when you guys are active and asking your questions, especially when it's about such a cool industry like this one and the great things that they're doing. Yeah, just watching that B-roll, I was like, I've got to show the viewers this because it was just way too cool to not keep an eye on that one.